Welcome to Caesar's Journal, your go-to podcast for thrilling stories and eerie tales. Get ready for tonight's episode titled, A Ouija Board on a Saturday Night. It was November 22nd, 1986, in the small town of Waldorf, Maryland. Dylan had just arrived home from school, eagerly anticipating a get-together with his friends, Harold and Roberto. They planned to watch an eagerly awaited heavyweight boxing match that night. His mother, Rhonda, had agreed to the sleepover on the condition that the boys kept it quiet. The last time they had a sleepover, Harold had made a hole in the wall while trying to reenact wrestling moves he'd seen on TV. Roberto was the first to arrive. "Good evening, Mrs. McManaman," he said politely. "Hello, Roberto. Dylan is upstairs. Please make yourself at home," Rhonda replied, gesturing toward the stairs. A few minutes later, Harold showed up carrying a strange-looking wooden box. "Good evening, Mrs. McManaman," he said, his voice a little forced. "Hi, Harold," Rhonda replied. "Dylan and Roberto are upstairs. What's that you've got there?" she asked, eyeing the box. "This? It's a new board game I picked up from the antique store," Harold replied with a hint of mystery. "Have fun," Rhonda said, heading toward the kitchen. Harold opened the door to Dylan's room to find Dylan and Roberto on the floor, engrossed in comic books. "Guys, look at this," Harold announced, holding up the wooden box. "What is it?" Roberto asked, his curiosity piqued. "It's a Ouija board," Harold said excitedly. "A Ouija board!" Roberto exclaimed, his voice tinged with fear. "Isn't that dangerous? My grandma was watching a documentary about it on Channel 8. "It's fun. Those TV reports are exaggerating," Harold said dismissively. "Besides, if it turns out to be real, we might make a ghost friend." Dylan grabbed the box and started to read the instructions. "We shouldn't worry. This is just a toy," he said, trying to calm Roberto down. "Do you want to give it a try?" Harold asked. "Maybe we can ask who is going to win the fight." "Okay, turn off the lights," Dylan replied. They dimmed the room, leaving only a small lamp on, creating an eerie atmosphere. The boys sat in a circle around the Ouija board. Harold placed his fingers on the planchette and gestured for the others to do the same. "Is there anyone here with us?" Harold asked. The planchette began to move slowly, causing Roberto to gasp. "Harold, are you messing with us?" "I'm not touching it," Harold insisted, his voice serious. The planchette spelled out, "Yes." "Who will win the boxing match tonight?" Dylan asked, his voice steady. The planchette moved again, this time spelling out, "Mike." Roberto pulled his hands away. "This is freaky. Harold, you must be pushing it." "I swear I'm not," Harold said, his eyes wide with excitement. Just then Rhonda called from downstairs, "Boys, the fight is about to start!" They rushed downstairs, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As they gathered around the TV, the announcer's voice boomed. "And now, the main event. Mike Tyson versus Trevor Berbick." The boys exchanged nervous glances, the Ouija board's prediction lingering in their minds as the match began. The fight started, and Mike dominated early, securing a victory as the board had predicted. The boys exchanged uneasy glances. "You know, it was a 50-50 chance to get it right," Dylan said, trying to downplay the eeriness. Unable to shake their curiosity, the boys hurried back to Dylan's room and set up the Ouija board on the floor again. They lit a few candles to enhance the atmosphere, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "All right, let's ask it more questions," Harold said, his excitement barely contained. They placed their fingers on the planchette once more. "Is there anyone still here with us?" Dylan asked. The planchette moved swiftly to yes. "What's your name?" Roberto asked, his voice trembling slightly. The planchette spelled out Vremial. "Vremial," Harold read aloud. "That's a weird name." "What do you want from us?" Dylan asked. The planchette moved again. Friends? "Friends? Roberto repeated, his fear slowly turning into curiosity. Why do you want to be friends with us? The board responded, Lonely. Lonely? How old are you? Harold asked, his skepticism giving way to intrigue. Veryold, the planchette spelled out, very old. What do you like to do for fun? Dylan asked, trying to make the entity seem more relatable. The planchette hesitated for a moment before moving. Games. Games? Like what kind of games? Roberto asked. The planchette spelled out Hideandsseek. The boys glanced at each other. Hide and seek, that's not so bad, Harold said, smiling. Where do you come from? Dylan asked more seriously. Hell, the board responded. The room fell silent. The boys looked at each other, uncertainty clouding their faces. Are you evil? Roberto asked, his voice barely a whisper. The planchette moved slowly. Nottoyou. Dylan took a deep breath. What do you want us to do? The planchette moved faster now, almost eagerly. Kepplaying. Roberto frowned. Keep playing what? Questions. Questions okay, Dylan said, his voice steady. How do we know you won't hurt us? The planchette paused, then moved. Trustme, trust me. Harold laughed nervously. Well, Vremiel, what should we ask next? The planchette moved. We owe you our future. Roberto shivered. Our future, like what about it? Joinme. Join you where? Dylan asked, though he suspected the answer. Hell, the board spelled out. The boys exchanged worried glances. I think that's enough for tonight, Dylan said, lifting his fingers off the planchette. The others quickly followed suit. As they blew out the candles, Roberto muttered, Maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all. Harold nodded. Yeah, let's just forget about Vremiel and focus on something else. But as they settled in for the night, the boys couldn't shake the feeling that their new friend might not be so easy to forget. Roberto woke up the next morning to find himself alone in the room. They must have gone downstairs, he said to himself. He went to check downstairs and saw Dylan with Rhonda eating breakfast. Did Harold go home? Roberto asked. Did who go home? Dylan replied, looking genuinely confused. Harold Smith. He was watching the fight with us last night, Roberto explained, searching Dylan's face for any hint of recognition. I don't know any Harold Smith. Are you okay, Roberto? Dylan asked, concern etched on his face. Is this a prank? Did Harold put you up to this because we were playing with his Ouija board last night? Roberto continued, his voice rising with a mix of frustration and fear. Ouija board, what is that? Dylan asked, scratching his head. Roberto felt a wave of confusion wash over him. He didn't know what to make of it. He turned to Rhonda for some clarity. Mrs. McManaman, you remember Harold, right? He brought a wooden box last night. Rhonda shook her head slowly. I'm sorry, Roberto. I don't remember any Harold. You and Dylan were alone last night. Roberto's heart raced. He rushed back upstairs to Dylan's room, desperately searching for any sign of Harold or the Ouija board. But the room was just as they had left it, minus any trace of Harold or the mysterious wooden box. He sat on the edge of the bed, his mind racing. Could it all have been a dream? But it had felt so real. The boxing match, the Ouija board, Vremiel. He glanced at the floor where they had played the night before. Nothing made sense. Roberto's heart pounded harder. He had to know if it was real or just his imagination playing tricks on him. He needed answers. Dylan, are you sure you don't remember Harold? Roberto asked again, more desperately this time, as he re-entered the kitchen. I'm sure, Roberto, Dylan replied, still looking worried. Maybe you just had a weird dream. Roberto shook his head. No, it wasn't a dream. It felt too real. Rhonda interjected gently. Why don't you boys take it easy today? Maybe watch a movie or something. It sounds like you had a pretty intense night. Roberto nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. If no one else remembered Harold and the Ouija board was gone, then what had really happened last night? As he sat down for breakfast, he couldn't help but feel that this was far from over. Roberto spent the day with Dylan, trying to act normal despite the gnawing uncertainty. They played board games, watched movies, and even rode their bikes around the neighborhood. But Roberto's mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the previous night over and over again. As evening fell, Roberto prepared to head home. "You sure you're okay, Roberto?" Dylan asked, his face a mask of genuine concern. "Yeah, just a little shaken, I guess," Roberto replied, forcing a smile. "All right, see you at school tomorrow," Dylan said, waving as Roberto walked down the driveway. As Roberto made his way home, he couldn't shake the unease. The streets seemed darker, and the shadows seemed to move with a life of their own. He kept replaying everything in his head, trying to make sense of it. When he finally got home, his mind was heavy with unanswered questions. He headed to his room, flicking on the light. There, on his desk, sat the Ouija board, the very same one Harold had brought. His breath caught in his throat. How did it get here? A chill ran down his spine as he cautiously approached it. The planchette was positioned in the center of the board, untouched. He reached for the small bottle of pills on his nightstand, his hands trembling as he opened it and took one of his prescribed medications. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind. Had he brought the board home himself and forgotten? Was his mind playing tricks on him? Roberto sat on his bed, staring at the board, a sense of dread washing over him. Was Vremiel real, or was it all in his head? He glanced at the board once more, noticing a faint, eerie glow around the letters. He closed his eyes, trying to steady his breathing. The whispering voice from his dream echoed in his ears. "Trust me, Roberto." As he opened his eyes, the room seemed to darken. Shadows danced on the walls, and he felt a cold presence in the room. The board remained still, but its mere presence felt overwhelming. Roberto couldn't tell if this was reality or a side effect of his medication. The line between the two blurred, leaving him trapped in a world of uncertainty. Roberto would never know for sure, but the doubt would linger, a shadow on the edge of his mind. If you enjoyed tonight's episode of Caesar's Journal, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our podcast for more captivating stories. Thank you for listening.